Hey everyone, and welcome back to the History of Comics. It's been a while since I've done a video of my own. I was in a live chat some time ago talking about V4 Vendetta with Mind the Comics, Howler Mouse, and Comic Crack, but I haven't been able to dedicate some time to doing a video of my own. And I've been trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about because I still want to focus on some more independent comics from the 1980s and 90s, although clearly with a more traditional action adventure style. And I had this big book at home that I haven't had the time to finish reading, but finally got around to it. Here it is. This is Xenozoic, the Flash Publications compilation of the Xenozoic Tales stories that were published by Kitchen Sink Press. As you can see, it's quite thick. But if the name Xenozoic doesn't mean anything to you, you might be more familiar with it with its more mainstream title, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. And now, Xenozoic Tales was a kind of an oddball at Kitchen Sink Press because it did not look like the type of indie comics that Dennis Kitchen would publish. It was not related to the indie scene from the 60s and 70s. In fact, quite the contrary. These stories are very much in the action adventure style. Kind of reminds you of comic strips. See a little bit of maybe Al Williamson here. Also maybe a bit of stuff like Prince Valiant and Flash Gordon, and that's what those are the most obvious influences I can find here on the work of Mark Schultz. So these stories are all in black and white, but they're very expressive. Sometimes they're gray tones. And this is a science fiction universe. The Xenozoic Tales was created by Mark Schultz as a post-apocalyptic land. The humanity had to face an ecological disaster, and they had to retreat to the underground. And when they came back, the world was completely changed. Civilization had disappeared, but they still had some limited knowledge to be able to survive. And but also the sea level was higher, and all the animals that they knew had disappeared, and all of a sudden there were dinosaurs all around. Let's see if I can show some. Oh, okay. So I think that Mark Schultz did this because he liked to draw dinosaurs, and there were not enough dinosaur comics at the time. Just a little bit more here. I love this art, and this is a shame that there are actually only 14 full comic books of Xenozoic Tales material that were made by Schultz. He's definitely not a very fast writer, but for a while he didn't need to be. Schultz first created a one-shot story, simply titled Xenozoic, which is the second story in this volume, which was published in a kitchen sink anthology named Death Rattle, Volume 2, Number 8, if I'm not mistaken. And it's not this one. It's not this one either. Nice. Actually, it's not the first story here. Let's try and find it. There we go. This was the first story that was published, and after that, it's out of order here because that story hit the ground running. The two main characters, mechanic Jack Tenrek and Ambassador Hannah Dundee. Hey, Damien's in the chat. Hi, Damien. How you doing? Do you have Xenozoic Tales? So going on, Jack Tenreck and Hannah Dundee, which is an ambassador from the city of Wassun, clearly meant to represent Washington, D.C., to the city in the sea, which is what is left of Manhattan. But the territory all around has been converted into jungle, so and some places are a bit inhospitable. It's a mixture of jungle and mountain, which didn't seem like it was supposed to be there. I'm not sure if they're trying to get to the Appalachians where they are. I'd imagine it would be easier to go upstream from the Hudson to the Great Lakes area. Dinosaurs are not the only animals that you can see. Here's a woolly mammoth. The animals that Schultz draws are very expressive. The story began to be published in around 1978, I believe, and those 14 issues were published until 1996. In most cases, with intermittently. Actually, it's not 1978. It's supposed to have. Okay, because they're signed here, aren't they? They're not. They're signed somewhere else. Okay. Yes, 1986. Does it make 3 or 4 issues a coherent trade? There's a trade, an old kitchen sink trade with the first 6 issues, and another one I think with the following 8. And Epic Comics published the first 6 issues, retitled as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. So this started in 1986. At first, it was being published by on a bi-monthly basis. It kind of fell back for a while, but to Schultz that was not a problem because he, like on the case of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Rocketeer, Schultz hit the jackpot, and product developer Stephen E. D'Souza, who works in Hollywood, does TV projects. He bought the rights and produced an arcade video game. Hey Bueller, what's up? Glad to see some people watching. I was not planning on doing this, so having the people show up is good. So in 1992, there was an arcade game titled Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Schultz had to license the use of the Cadillac brand. He had the Cadillacs inside the stores. Those are the cars that he usually runs around with, but they were converted to move on bat guano instead of gasoline because there isn't any. Here in the story, you can see one right here. They're also made so they can traverse difficult terrain, which was not a feature of the 1950s Cadillacs. Right around the arcade game was successful enough that it spawned a second video game for Sega, for the Sega consoles, I believe, and also there was in 1993 there was an animated series which there are only 13 episodes, so it was not enough to go on syndication, which is kind of why it was forgotten. The animated series was actually the first time that I heard about the Xenozoic Tales. Of course, it was called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Jack Tenreck is there. So is Hannah. Also, most of the supporting cast is there. Jack's friend and voice of reason, Mustafa Cairo, and their main enemies, Governor Wilhelmine Scharnhorst and the Terhune brothers, who serve as Scharnhorst's enforcers. There's a triumvirate of rulers in the city of the sea, and Scharnhorst, who is elected to that position in the middle of during the course of the series, is a very corrupt city official, and she also appears in the cartoon. I ultimately found out about Xenozoic Tales actually from the Wizard Magazine price guide. I had no idea it was an independent comic. Damien says was like the Frank Frazetta comic. Yeah, yeah. There's a bit of Frank. There's a bit of Frazetta style adventure. I compare it more to traditional adventure comic book strips. Not so much Frazetta. There's Frazetta also had his own strips in the 1950s, but he ultimately became known by doing other things like the Conan covers for the Lancer paperback editions, and of course Death Dealer and the painted covers. That, from Wizard Magazine's press guide, and there was a time when a couple of stories ran in a Portuguese heavy metal type magazine called Seleções BD, alongside a few French comic book series. I have no idea why they decided to publish them, but I thought they were interesting enough. And when I finally saw this, I just had to buy it. These are about 400 pages, and you have the Death Rattle story and all the 14 comics, the stories that were produced by Schultz only. There are a few backup stories that ran from issues number 3 to 14, which were drawn by sometimes inker Steve Stiles, which are not included here. In the final years of the strip, Schultz began to experiment a little bit more. As you can see from this page, he was experimenting a little bit more with the storytelling on how he was going to use the image, and he started crafting an ongoing storyline. The first stories are good because you can start reading at any point, and then go for the other issues. All the stories are closed. There are elements that are used to build up on the universe that Schultz was building. But starting around issue number 8, Schultz starts doing an ongoing storyline when Scharnhorst is elected, and a race of lizard people appear that are afraid of what the new human civilization is discovering about how the previous ecological disaster had happened. It's actually explained in one of these stories how it happened, and they're bound to discover it again, which will upset the balance between humanity and nature. So there's a very ecological message here, which becomes stronger as the series progresses. As we entered the 1990s, and there was a lot of concern about the hole in the ozone layer above the Antarctic. We had several oil spills in Alaska and the Gulf, and there was talk about preserving endangered species. So that ecological message is what resonates more in these stories. There's a little bit of palatial intrigue because the Jack and Hannah end up having to run away from the city in the sea, and they go back to Wasun, where this looks like a 19th century monarchy court, as you can see from the uniforms that they have to wear. This is a formal dinner party, so that's why everybody's all dressed up. But there's a lot of a structured society here that is a bit different from what they're used in the city, where everybody tries to be as practical as possible because ultimately they have to preserve what little resources they have. That kind of makes sense, as the city in the sea being New Yorkers, that they know that they have limited space, and they have to go after their food because things don't grow in Manhattan, and especially not everything is underwater. Only the top of the buildings is seen. While here, Wasun being Washington D.C., you end up with the rulers and even the populace being unaware of how many resources they're spending, and not caring much about it. there's a begrudging alliance at the time with between Jack Tenreck and this poacher. They don't trust him very much, but he ends up being maybe the more honorable of the bunch, even if he's a bit conceited. The story, the comic ended in 1996, a victim of the comic book market crash, with issue number 14, and it was not finished. And when this came out in 2010, sometime later, they published a lot of art books featuring Mark Schultz's art, and they promised that Schultz was going to finish the story, and that they were going to publish an 80-page special. We're still waiting. I see that Schultz is still a little bit slow, but he's meticulous, and it's his story. So if he ever gets it done, I trust it's going to be a good job. In the last few years, after the video games and the cartoon money probably ran out. I doubt there are very many residuals nowadays. Schultz has been seen doing other stuff. He wrote an arc on Superman about 12 or 15 years ago. He did the illustrations for reprints. No, it's not Schultz. That's Damien. It was Jay Stevens, the Rocketeer creator. Schultz is still around. He's been writing the Prince Valiant comic strip. He's no longer writing the daily strip, but he's still writing the Sunday strip. That's what I read about him. So he's still active. Hopefully, he has some time to keep on finishing Xenozoic Tales. So, if you can get your hands on this, it's a quicker way of collecting the entire series. It's missing the backups, the backup strips, but they didn't focus exactly on Jack and Hannah. They're more about the supporting characters, so they're not completely necessary. So, okay. So apart from that, at the time last weekend, it was my comic book shop's 19th anniversary, and I took the time to buy a few things. Let's see if I can show them. Okay. So there was a few cheap comics around. This is an Atari graphic novel produced by DC, written by Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, and it has art by George Perez and Dick Giordano. Okay, better like this. The Atari Force was one of most readers' favorite strips in the DC comics that we imported from Brazil, and I have an Atari graphic novel from the DC graphic novel line. These were made for the video games, I believe, and I was aware they existed. I think it was either Silver Age Dave or Metarog that were talking about promotional comics, and I think one of them showed something like this. And so when I saw this, I immediately took the opportunity to buy it. Now, since I was mostly I preferred to be a Marvel zombie while I was growing up, I kind of decided not to go after the DC comics. So I have lots of holes in my DC collection from the time, which meant I didn't exactly read some stories that I should have read, including this one. This is Superman number 33 from Editora Abril in Brazil, and it has the DC Comics Presents story where Superman meets Swamp Thing. Let me see if I can. Let me try and get this out of here. Okay. And it also had a Infinity Inc. story. And Legion of Superheroes, which was one of the main backup strips in Superman at the time. In fact, there's quite a few of those around here. Next, Superman number 100, special edition, 130 pages. That was the best thing that we had, where all of the superhero comics while I was growing up were anthologies, and they had lots of stories, so much better than the one story, one character that you guys had in the United States of America. So this is much more recent Jerry Ordway story, already from the 90s. Lobo, of course, very popular at the time. The Brazilian publishers liked Lobo very much, and that's why they published the present day Legion series with because he was a member. Superman in his Kryptonian uniform. So they ran a full storyline on this special editions. There are six original comics in here. This cover attracted me, was like a magnet, Gil Kane story. Superman against Satanus and Blaze. Like the other one. It's also got some Legion stories around here. Legion kind of fell by the wayside after Crisis on the Brazilian publisher. Okay, this one is Superman issue number 19. This one was still an 80-page comic with a spine. And those actually preserve better than the post 1986 stuff, which was only stapled, because the covers keep coming off. This issue doesn't even have a it does have a Superman story, but the main story is Legion. This is from the Keith Giffen era, around the Dark Side saga time, the Great Darkness saga. In fact, I think this one had the annual, yeah, exactly, Legion of Superheroes annual number 1 from 1982. Favorite character from the DC universe? Well, I usually tend to go for team books, and at the time the New Teen Titans were much better than the Justice League. But I usually go for more offbeat characters when I'm talking about DC. The Demon is one of my personal favorites. One of the first DC stories I read was the Demon miniseries by Matt Wagner, also Warlord. He appeared in one of these magazines as well. And I developed a taste for some of the Kirby stuff. I like Manhunter's uniform, and the Justice Society nowadays is one of my all-time favorites. Okay. They ran one of the Jimmy Olsen stories in here. Also an ad for the Superman Spider-Man crossover. Here it is, with art by Jack Kirby and the WLX and the Newsboy Legion. This was not a normal. This was a normal story to publish. They usually didn't publish these stories. Okay, special Conan and Red Sonja. Cover's torn, but doesn't matter. It is a collection of stories. They're not following any specific chronology. Conan and Red Sonja appear in most of them. Conan started in the mixed in with the superhero material before evolving into his own magazine, and then they had a digest-sized story for the Conan the Barbarian stories, plus the Black and White Savage Sword, which was one of a favorite among people who did not want to read superheroes. A few other stories around here. Okay, here's a King Cole story by the with art by the Severance. King Cole is a bit of an acquired taste. It's not in the same vein as Conan, but I don't think that the universe is as interesting or as varied. Okay, so this one is a pretty beat up, but I had to buy it. It was only 25 cents. The Phantom, published in a Portuguese magazine, World of Adventures, Mundo de Aventuras. The Phantom is one of my favorite characters because I used to read it in as a newspaper strip in the paper that my dad used to buy. I believe this story is from around the 1950s because this is still Wilson McCoy art, which is not my favorite. Somebody wrote on it. something about soccer is here. Something wrote on the inside cover. So, Superpowers number 10, featuring Batman. Superpowers was sort of where they put the big sagas. This one? No, this is Bill Sienkiewicz. This cover is by Bill Sienkiewicz. They sometimes had original art. The Brazilians had an artist called Watson Portela who made some original covers for their publications. There was a time when they didn't want to buy the rights on the inside cover of the last one. The Phantom? Yeah. No, the Phantom doesn't have art on the inside cover. I'm not sure if it's the painted cover. I don't know where they got it. This is okay. So Superpowers, and we had Batman. The story is from, I can tell. We got some Joker. Several arts on this one. I think this was a storyline. And of course, Ra's al Ghul. I think that all of the Batman's enemies appear in this story. Okay. Another Superpowers. This has Armageddon Inferno. So first part starring Firestorm. This crossed over with the other books, but they focus on the main story here. Armageddon Inferno number 2, Justice League, and Lobo and the Legion. Okay. Death of Superman Collected Edition. The good thing, even though this is how many pages? 240, 160 pages. These were good value for money. They were more expensive than the regular 80-page magazines, but you had a good value for money. They had a cover effect on this one, which was not normal. This should have made it more expensive. The rest you all know it's part of the Death of Superman storyline, fighting Doomsday. Another Superpowers, Deathstroke and the New Teen Titans. But by this time, George Perez was not drawing anymore. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so the term Deathstroke. It was still called the Terminator At the time, people still referred to him as the Terminator, and I still like to call him that sometimes. He was good. Beast Boy was obviously quite emotional about this trial because he considered Deathstroke responsible for what had happened to Terra in the Judas contract. Return of the Defenders, special edition. It has all the main stories from all the annuals. This title here, called Epicus Marvel, they started running. Okay, no problem, Damien. Thanks for stopping by. They started running this one with Fantastic Four versus X-Men, then with X-Men versus Avengers. I have one with the original Human Torch miniseries, which retells all his story. So here's another one. I bought a few other books. This one's a bit more indie. This is a Portuguese comic, The Mighty Enlil. It's made in English, but it's a Portuguese author and a Portuguese publisher. It features the characters are based on Sumerian gods. The story is a bit of an indie style, so it might not be everyone's cup of tea. The Fabulous Feats of Phantomius, a Gentleman Thief. This is a sort of a prequel to the Donald Duck's superhero identity, which is very popular in Europe, especially in Italy. The I believe it's called Mighty Duck or Power Duck. In Italy it's called Paperinic, and here we call him Super Pat, Super Duck. And in one story, he found the equipment that belonged to this guy, Phantomius, who is based on the French literature character Fantomas. This is a series of short stories that are tied together. They have a more subdued color palette to simulate being in the 1930s. And the Italian artists that are doing the Disney stories are nowadays are amazing. A lot of movement that was not present in the stories that were made in the 60s and 70s. So once more, showing this cover because it's great. It's a shame that Disney is not as popular in the United States anymore as it is in Europe. Okay, another one. This was cheap. I bought it for 50 cents. An Alien Legion one shot, focusing on their Wolverine type, Lobo type character, Jugger Grimrod. This was around the same time as the end of Volume 2, and it's written by Chuck Dixon with art by Mike McMahon. So even for the 90s, it was not your typical science fiction style story. And my last purchase, a Valerian book. Valerian is one of our favorite French comic book characters around here. I understand that the stories were republished in English in the United States around the time of the movie came out. We had a newspaper. We have a collection of books that was published alongside a newspaper. They put two albums in a cheaper format, so a lot of people took the opportunity to buy them. And okay, that's it. Thank you very much for staying with me, Damien and Bueller. So I took the opportunity to do this little bit of show and tell. Once again, the main topic of this chat was Xenozoic Tales, also known as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. If you have the opportunity, go buy that because it deserves to be in everybody's collection. Right now, I'm going to devote some time to rereading Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. We we already arranged to go on another live stream with Mind the Comics and Howler Mouse and Comic Crack on Mind the Comics' channel, and we're going to be talking about Swamp Thing in less than 2 weeks. So get ready for one of those. Once more, Damien Bueller, thank you very much for stopping by. I'll see when I can rustle up something else, and until then, keep reading old comics.